Hello, everybody. Here's another episode from Vina Talks NV Live. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Jeff with us today. Jeff from Germany, not
Hello.
quite originally, but locality wise. So, Jeff, to hit the ground running, can I please hear a little bit more about you?
Sure. Well, originally I'm from America. I grew up in New York, and then I started my career out in California. Well, I really started what the job I currently work. I started in the tech sector, working in gaming. And when I was 27, I discovered I was a German. I didn't know before that, and so then I decided to use that as an opportunity to get my citizenship in Germany. First moved over to Austria, stayed in gaming, and since 2000, early 2020, right before the pandemic broke out, I've been working in the insurance industry here in Germany. And I work as a user experience designer on the customer journey, customer experience team.
Beautiful. Obviously, this is a podcast series that I do for GAIN, for Autism Insurance Investment and Neurodiversity. And we focus on neurodivergent people in the sense of course, the advocacy, that kind of being the upstanders, being able to sort of highlight the needs and occasionally the challenges we're facing in the workplace. Could we take a step back and sort of hear a little bit more about your diagnosis?
Sure. So that came about. The I decided to pursue a diagnosis. I believe it was in 2021. Yeah, it was in 2021, and it came as a result of just difficulties that I was having at work. And of course, these difficulties had persisted throughout my career. Um, and also just difficulties I was having in my personal life, but those were a little less pronounced. They weren't as hard to, I guess, overcome. And I don't think any of the problems were. I'm not, now knowing what I know about my diagnosis, I think I'm pretty fortunate. I think I'm more the exception than the rule. I have been able to maintain steady employment at least for the past couple of years, and so I feel very fortunate in that regard. But I was having certain issues at work that made me sort of look a little closer at what was going on in my life, what was going on with me personally. It kind of threw things in a different context with problems I was having at home, and it just raised a couple questions. As a matter of fact, that was happening at the same time because pursuing a diagnosis is kind of not only is it kind of emotional, it's costly. So I needed the impulse. I needed the issue at work that was kind of the trigger to make me say it's worthwhile investing this time, investing this money just to be sure, because this could, if this is a problem that could potentially cost me my job or cause me other problems at work, I need to know exactly what the source is. So I pursued a diagnosis with a physician in America named Dr. Kenneth Roberson. And so I got officially diagnosed with being a low level of, well, I guess Asperger's isn't the official term anymore, but I'm a very low level grade of autism, but I was diagnosed as autistic by this American doctor. Um, and that was very eye-opening, but also it's also led to some interesting issues here living in Germany because my diagnosis is not considered valid here. If I wanted to go get any sort of protections or something like that, it's not seen as an official diagnosis. But yeah, that's what inspired me to go get a diagnosis, was sort of difficulties in communication that I was having. And luckily, the way a particular issue happened, like the last issue that kind of pushed me over the edge to make me decide to pursue a diagnosis, was how it was communicated. Certain things, the way it was communicated to me, how my behavior was being perceived or how motivated I was seeming. And at the time, like I said, the pandemic was in full swing, and I had just gotten the job right before the pandemic broke out. So I felt incredibly lucky because everything was very tumultuous at the time, even economically. I don't know what would have happened. I don't know what had happened to my job prospects after the pandemic broke out. So inwardly, I was incredibly thankful. I felt really blessed that I'd landed this job right before this because it provided this level of stability that was just a godsend for me at the time. But outwardly, it was communicated to me that I didn't seem motivated. I didn't seem particularly focused. And I thought to myself how weird that was, because you could understand if someone had criticism of the job you did or something about the quality of your work. That's fine. But how could it possibly be that inwardly I'm doing backflips and I'm really grateful and I'm actually just being, I couldn't be any happier about the position that I'm in. I couldn't be any more thankful. But outwardly, the perception is that I'm indifferent or I'm distant. And I thought, okay, yeah, I think there's an issue here. but I don't think it has anything to do with work. I think this is probably something a bit deeper. And that in conjunction with conversations that I'd had at the time with my wife, my now wife, led me to pursue a diagnosis. And I guess, yeah, I had never suspected when I was younger that I was on the spectrum, but looking back now and after kind of reassessing everything, it probably should have been more obvious. And so that's kind of led me to the position that I'm in today. And because of my current involvement in the insurance industry, that's how I found Gain and ultimately how I got in contact with your organization.
Yeah. I mean, incredible what you were saying about, the kind of antithesis. What you have, what you hold inside, and how you sort of perceive your own situation versus how that sort of reflects on others the whole time. Like, okay, for me with ADHD, is a little bit more on the sort of unfiltered sort of side of things. So to me, it's all about sort of being me, being honest. Whereas, the perception you get, there's occasions when you get it sort of demonstrated quite out there, like quite strongly. It's like, don't the thing you said just too much or you overshared or but no, that matters. So interesting. So especially, given obviously the whole pandemic situation, some people, as you said, for some people meant there would be inferno, some sort of, lost the job. So for you to land the job whilst you're getting clarity about who you are and what makes you tick. It's always obviously something that you feel getting cathartic, that you're starting to make sort of strides and progress about your own self. Um, how do you think can we actually change this outwardly, as you said, perception, the appreciation of other humans who are also like us, neurodivergent? Is it
I'm
a
sorry,
double empathy
what was the question
situation?
again?
The question is, how can we change the perception from the outsiders?
Oh, that's a big question. I think a lot of it has to do with just understanding what it is. That's a big part. I'm kind of reluctant to speak in broad strokes about or neurodiversity generally. Certainly about diversity, equity, inclusion generally. I have seen people try to discuss these topics in broad strokes, and I I'm not convinced that always works. I think sometimes different people require different things. For example, I was at a DEI. I've been taking part in some events, some local where I live in Berlin.
Mhm.
And the last event was really interesting because there was two. There was two events that I'd gone to. The first one went really great, and the people were very, very nice. The second one, and that one, believe it or not, when we were doing these breakout groups, we were communicating and we were putting stuff on, we were writing on stickies and posting stuff on a board. And I found that mode of communication to be a lot better for me because I was able to sit and think about what I wanted to say. And the second one, it was it was far more conversational, and I felt like I felt very welcome there. The people were very kind, and I felt productive. But I noticed I didn't feel like I was able to express myself as well as I did the first time. So as far as changing perception, I think you need to first really tackle a lot of the stereotypes that actually affected me negatively. I think I said, so the first thing is that just because you get diagnosed with autism, heaven forbid you were to get diagnosed with cancer, that doesn't make you an oncologist. If you were to get diagnosed with a heart condition, that doesn't make you a cardiologist. And if you get diagnosed with autism, you don't all of a sudden become an expert. You don't become a psychologist. So you only notice that you have certain problems, but you don't necessarily know the remedy or how to fix them. You can only really communicate the symptoms and the problems. And all you really have to work with that I had to work with were sort of these basic stereotypes. And I think, like many people, maybe who were born in the 80s like me, the only real experience or image that I had of autism was just watching Dustin Hoffman pretend to be autistic for about an hour and a half in Rain Man. And you figure, well, if I'm not like that, then obviously I'm not autistic. Obviously, my perception of that has changed quite a bit. And I think a lot of it, because there's a lack of understanding about what it is and how it affects people, for example, when I brought this issue up seeking accommodations or just looking for support, or just learning what support was available to me in the workplace, the suggestion was a communication course. A communication course isn't going to do anything any more than, if somebody, heaven forbid, somebody was paralyzed. It's like saying, well, I need to get up this flight of stairs. And rather than offering them an alternative to get up from the ground floor to the top floor, they say, well, they don't offer an elevator, they offer you a personal trainer to help with your circulation, your legs. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure there's a positive benefit there somehow, but that doesn't address the core problem. And so a lack of understanding about what autism is, what it looks like, not only affects, I think, people in your immediate surrounding, people you work with, but it also affected me because I had those stereotypes, because I had that conception of what it looked like, that what autism looks like. There's a meme kind of going around the autism community, you don't look autistic, autism doesn't look like anything. Because of that perception, I think that more than anything delayed my pursuing a diagnosis. I also personally, I couldn't say for certain, but I also personally think that this perception about what autism is supposed to look like, or what's typically autistic, and the typical behavior that will often attend autistic people, I think that has also led to this underdiagnosis of women. I think males are typically diagnosed more often, but women are on the spectrum apparently at 50, it's 50-50. It's just as often, but women are underdiagnosed. And I think a big part of that is the sort of cultural perception about what it's supposed to look like. So I would start with, if I had to start anywhere, I would start there, that, if it's autism doesn't look like anything, people are very good at masking. I'm told I'm pretty good at covering up and masking. I think I am as well. And so autism can look like many things, and you shouldn't simply assume that because someone looks a certain way or communicates a certain way that they're not on the spectrum. And similarly, I think anybody who's having difficulties at the workplace, this is something that you should keep an open mind to. I wish I had, because maybe I would have pursued a diagnosis sooner, and I would have been able to seek out the support that I needed much earlier.
You know what? It affects us all. Even for me as a fellow neurodivergent, albeit of ADHD, I wasn't necessarily aware either of ADHD and the behavioral sort of traits, or indeed of any of the other sort of fellow neurodivergent sort of individuals who are probably not ADHD, they're autistic or they're dyslexic. So it's so difficult to gain this kind of degree of knowledge. And I completely agree with you. It's not even a question about gaining the knowledge. So long as you gain awareness and respect and curious respect about somebody who actually probably behaves in a different way or expresses themselves in a different way as we do. In your examples, which were extremely valuable, what I note being the difference is the format. So one gave you the space to use the sticky, notes, and sort of take your own freedom, time with yourself to reflect this thing and put it on the board, whereas the other almost put you on the spot to come up with, and we almost kind of, I find in D&I sort of events, that you're almost sort of expected to come up with this amazing sort of expression, this amazing analogy that people will go home with, and they'll be like, oh my God, I'll be using them myself, and that's so clever. It's not about getting clever or impressing, it's about sort of accepting. And the other thing, really, that's almost a pet peeve of the things that I get to hear from the other individual members, also of the experiences that I'm actually now gaining myself over the last almost 2 years, is the typical behavior, for example, of an autistic person. So we're trying to put normal or typical back into the frame somehow. It's a bit oxymoron. We're trying to step away from normal, from average, from, what's the median? And we kind of go like, yeah, but the only way we can explain it. And I'm speaking as an economist. It's the average user. It's the average sort of consumer. Come on, let's move on with the times. One small sort of, and I'm not quite sure whether that's just a statement or a question, or both. What very recently I'm getting to sort of learn more and more, and most definitely observe more and more, is the difference between the medical model of neurodiversity versus the social model. And you inspired me in sort of using this kind of analogy just now when you said the person with a wheelchair, and do they need the elevator? They need the psychologist kind of say, come on, you can do that. Come off with wheelchair and sort of, start taking the steps. So the medical sort of model, trying to cure, trying to fix the problem, get you off the wheelchair, give you physio treatments and say, come on, surely you can start moving, Whereas the social model tries to fix the barriers.
Right.
The person find ways, well, fine, use weights already available in the said infrastructure to go to the places that the other person who doesn't.
Right. I think if I was to think about, I've thought about what it means for it to be, because there's diversity, equity, inclusion. These are a lot of buzzwords that carry, unfortunately, a lot of political weight with them, and they can lead to some sort of charged conversations. But I would say if a place is to, if inclusion is to mean anything, it means that you can be the person that you are naturally, and you can excel in that environment. You don't have to fit yourself to the environment. And I think just going back to I go back to the idea of a person in a wheelchair, just because that's a problem we can see. This problem when you're neurodiverse is usually invisible. And so I think for some reason, I think it's just a natural human bias where you think if you can't see the problem, it's harder to take it. Maybe the wrong term is to take it seriously, but it's harder to recognize that it's there and to keep it in front of mind that it is there. And it's sort of like, if you want to have if you want to make your office more accessible, well, that requires maybe some renovation. That means maybe moving around some of the office furniture. That means maybe some construction work. There's really no way around that. And it doesn't matter. You can't just take the exact floor plan as you have it and say, how do we keep everything as it is, but make it inclusive? You can't. You have to you're going to have to tear up some concrete someplace, and it's going to have to disturb the other people around you. There might be other people who aren't physically disabled, who like where they're sitting, but in order to make room for that person who has a wheelchair and make a workspace for them that fits them, that person might have to move. And yes, that can be disturbing to other people who this ailment doesn't afflict, that doesn't affect them personally, but there's no other way to do it. And I think there's an equivalent with people who are on the spectrum, that in order to make the place, the flow of communication and teamwork inclusive, it would mean that certain modes of communication amongst other team members who aren't on the spectrum will have to change in order to accommodate this person, but you're not excluding them. Sure, it might not be their preferred way of working, but you're simply making it so that this person can participate, can contribute, can get into so to speak, can get into the office the same way a person in a wheelchair can now access the office physically. Now you're creating a work environment where this person can access the workplace, I guess, more on a mental, more of on a psychologically speaking. And that's how I think about this. I always think about that analogy. And I think the reason I explain it that way is to point out that that's why a communication course can't fix this. It's not that, because when you say choose a communication course, you're saying, I will teach you how to communicate more like a neurodivergent person so that you can mimic that behavior. You would never say to a physically disabled person, we can build something for you to mimic a fully able-bodied person. You would never say to a woman, the right solution to make a workplace more accessible for women so that women can thrive is to teach those women to behave more like a man. You would never say that. You would say to them, we will change the workplace and the work environment, and any prejudices that currently exist, we'll try to remove those to make it so that you can be whoever you are and thrive nonetheless. That is the difference. And so when you hear someone on the spectrum getting offered a communications course, it's saying, we'll teach you how to fit yourself to the existing model, but we're not going to change anything about the existing model.
Yeah. And at this point, I have to admit that I'm a little bit shocked, because when you first spoke about the example of the communication course, I thought the communication course was actually offered across the workplace, not to the people who are neurodiverse.
Unfortunately, it's kind of the band-aid. It's kind of the cure-all. To be fair, I've been offered a communication course for problems that have nothing to do with neurodivergence. And I assure you, they're every bit as relevant as the suggestion to. It's sort of this. It's been used as sort of a catch-all. I think there's a lot of companies that do that. Anytime there's a problem, just offer a communication course that'll fix it. I don't think it's unique to my situation.
I haven't actually come across a communication course offering, but I definitely have come across many. I bet I would, and I bet I would be top of the list. Get yourself sort of sorted. But I've definitely come across many training offers, and for our industry particularly, I find that to be such a superficial offering, and quite often, and apologies with the people who've worked, and obviously this is not going across the board, but often enough, I've seen, and I've been party to trainings that are delivered by people who have got not the faintest idea of the idiosyncrasies of our industry. And we've spoken before about the value of language. And the value of language, kind of interestingly enough, I have worked in Germany, and sometimes you would see people sort of going into trainings, basically offered in English, basically more as a way to hone their English sort of language skills, rather than sort of bother about the context of the training itself. And obviously that's music to the ears of any trainer, because, okay, I don't know this industry very well. I just train, sales. So what sales? Sales is a universal sort of thing. It doesn't quite matter where you are. I'll teach you that. And even better, if somebody's interested in understanding what bulldozing means, they actually, use it as a language lesson. I mean, nowadays, especially in the UK, or should I say particularly in our space, with the movement about neurodiversity, there's an awful lot of discussion about the power of language and non-ableist sort of language that includes everybody, the universal design that you spoke of earlier, language that really respects, shows awareness, and gives people space to be themselves and express themselves the way that they want. For you as an American, really, working in a German sort of working, environment, and I'm not referring to X employer versus Y. I'm speaking about the German industry as an industry. How do you think the language, plays a role in the context of neurodiversity?
Well, in my personal circumstance, I would say it's not. I think maybe it will lead, I think, to the assumption occasionally, perhaps I'm just guessing here, that difficulties that I have in communicating is probably I suspect people would think that the result of any difficulties in communication I have are the result of a language barrier, because my daily working language isn't German. And I would say that in my particular case, the language barrier with German, me being an American who's speaking German daily, it's a multiplier, but it's not the core root of the problem where there is a difficulty in communication. So it will multiply problems that are already there, but it by and large doesn't usually create the problems themselves. Just an example of just how my mind will work when I'm communicating. That is pretty much agnostic to any language barrier.
Yep.
Is if I was speaking with a team lead a couple of years ago, and he would say to me, "Okay, it was the beginning of the week. Here's a task. Let's catch up Let's catch up on Thursday about this." Now, when he says that, there's all this context behind it. You should follow up. He's assuming I understand that I'm going to be sending periodic updates. I'm going to be, letting him know this is how it's going. When I hear him say, "Let's catch up Thursday," I think, okay, we'll talk Thursday. And then I don't talk to him until Thursday about this issue. But now I understand, now that after it's explained to me, when he says, let's communicate, let's talk again on Thursday, I understand that he expects to have periodic updates in the interim. Now you could see right there, and as a matter of fact, that conversation happened in English. Right there, sure, if we were to have the conversation in German in a foreign language, it would lead to further opportunities for miscommunication, but it's not the core of the problem. As far as a universal language, I'm sorry if that was the question. It was a universal language in business, or are you referring to Germany in particular?
I'm actually, inviting you to use your own sort of lived experiences to respond to the question in the way that you think resonates.
Sure. So as far as I guess there hasn't necessarily, I mean, I think the language barrier has made it more difficult to sort of explain. Like I said, it's been a multiplier. It hasn't really it isn't the source of the problem. What has happened, what I have noticed, is that in Germany, there unfortunately seems to be a little less awareness about what this actually is. And there are plenty of initiatives I see in Germany of people and businesses in particular pushing to want to learn what this is and how they can support. But there doesn't seem to be as much awareness about what neurodiversity actually is, and that's unfortunate. That has been my experience.
Interesting.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm currently speaking with another psychologist who is licensed in Germany, but he's an American, and that was also his impression. His impression was very much that Germany, in a lot of ways, especially on social issues, can be a bit more forward-thinking than compared to America, but in certain areas, it's not as far along. And when it comes to neurodiversity, I would say that's one of those areas that this is kind of new. I think it will get there. I think there is absolutely the desire to catch up, but I think there's just a lack of awareness when somebody tells you you're neurodiverse. That what does that mean? That's not something that can be overcome just by helping them focus a little harder or giving them something as like a band-aid, like a communication course. It means something very specific. And I think that awareness about what this actually means, and how best to attack the problem is, it's not as far along as you might find it maybe at an American company, for example, or a
Yes.
company in the UK.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That fully resonates from my own experiences. Mind you, when I was in Germany, back in 2010, 29, um, aware of my own neurodivergence, but people were very much aware of what, they would always sort of describe as exuberant energy. You're so Mediterranean. I mean, compared to other fellow Mediterraneans, I suppose I was way more energetic. I don't know. People were like, okay, so you probably got it all the vitamin D actually spiked up. But what I really grew fascinated with is the very sort of target-oriented corporate culture. Very much target, very much like, yeah, we've got an issue, let's go and fix it, kind of thing. Let's put some trainings together. But when it comes to the more emotional sort of thing, and earlier you spoke about how do you make somebody feel welcome? How do you create a psychological sort of safety? How do you get them to feel like they belong? Whether they use a wheelchair or whether they need a walking stick, that they belong here, they've been recruited to use a skill set, match the role, and they can be themselves, obviously. I find that the German sort of working culture does not thrive on the emotional sort of underpinning and the psychological sort of safety. Not yet. I'm not suggesting there's not really willingness to do much, but I think so much of a mindset sort of embedded, let's say, intensity about this results-driven culture that does not always allow for this kind of divergence of let's invest some time. Your example earlier was speaking about knocking that wall down, or in incurring some extra expenses, or possibly disturbing some people sort of working, to really make sure that it equalizes the environment for everybody to be able to thrive and everybody to have the same chances. Well, for me, it's always a kind of temporary cost. It's a temporary thing. You have to sort of incur some expense. The expense might not be that high. Perhaps the expense of time and travel might be higher for you, but what you will be getting back into focusing into outcome will outweigh the investment sort of that you put for this X amount of months or years. What I want to find out at this stage is because when I was working in Germany, I had private insurance. What is the situation, do you know, of diagnosis in Germany? Can that be given to you from the public sort of health system as well as private, or do you
I'm also privately insured, so I believe so. Yes, my understanding is that it can take a little while. I've
right?
had somebody say to me that it takes a very long time. As I said, right now it's not really a critical issue. I do feel fairly. I feel like I'm doing pretty well at my job. I have good relationships here. I feel like everything's going pretty well. So I don't think I don't think it's a pressing need that I need to seek this out and get this immediately. I think it's a good thing to have to get an official German diagnosis. I do believe I'm positive it's available. The question is just how one might go about getting a diagnosis. For example, I think you could try seeking out a diagnosis at like the Charité or research is done, or you could reach out to a couple psychologists as I did. The issue that I ran into is just practical, just scheduling, availability. So that's what I've run into most immediately, is just waiting for an opening to pursue this line of diagnosis in Germany. So yes, that certainly is available. My understanding is the process can take a while. That's what I've heard. Like I said, I pursue the diagnosis in America just because, and I wanted to have a native English speaker diagnose me, because if I was to do so much about the diagnosis relates to the way you communicate. I wanted to make sure that if there was something noticed in my mode of communication or my style of communication that seemed off, it wasn't the result of a language barrier. It was I think it's probably be more obviously it would be more, the diagnosis I assume would be more accurate in my native language. So that's kind of the prerequisite for me. Even though, yes, I go to the doctor for any other issue, I'll speak in German. But for this one, it seems that the social communication aspect and the social intelligence aspect is so important. So it seemed like so that was an extra condition that was a little more difficult for me, is that I wanted to find a native English speaking psychologist who is licensed in Germany. That's a little more specific. So that's what has been the hardest for me so far. But that's kind of, like I said, unique to my circumstances.
Absolutely. And for me, it's very important now that I have the chance to speak with you, because we do have members who work for international global companies, and as we all know, and many insurers, Swiss, German. So we do have individual members who are also representing this kind of affiliations, and often they're asking us for feedback. And I have to say, this is where the value of local knowledge comes in. In the UK, we do have a huge waiting list for the national health system. And of course, if you were to go private, it costs a few thousands. And then, of course, again, I should say that you don't get a degree of recognition when you then, very similar to what you said about the American sort of diagnosis taken into Germany, here is between the private and the public sort of sector. You take it then to NHS in order to get medication, and they kind of go like, well, we're not quite sure whether we endorse this diagnosis.
Okay, yeah, it sounds pretty similar. Because I think in Germany, you get what's called a Grad Behinderung, so a degree of disability. I honestly have no idea how that would work. I'm not necessarily seeking that out. I don't know if I would even I don't think I would be legally classified as disabled. I don't feel disabled. It just seems like, one thing I should say, if there is a difference between the two cultures, Germany is it can be very bureaucratic, and having your documents in order can be a help to get things moving sometimes, to really just have that official certificate, having this in order. A lot of the communication can sometimes become, well, then if I seek out support, they say, go to the integrations office to help you out with that. That's not really something that we do. So having all your documentation in order can be quite a bit of a help here, it seems like. So for me right now, it would be a nice to have. But there are some unique issues to the culture here in Germany, and I can imagine that there's got to be an equivalent overseas in the UK.
Absolutely. And I completely agree about what you said with the documents. Even the kind of Anmeldung, when you first sort of sign in the country,
I was not used to that at all. I had to have 3 different forms of documentation just to move from Vienna to Berlin. So that was completely new to me.
Yeah, it brings some fond memories back, but not as fond as, what I was trying to sort of move my filing around in order to make space for the computer today to record the podcast, and I came across that. That doesn't sort of, well, I'm speaking like a Bavarian sort of president.
Oh, I didn't recognize
why. The Oktoberfest sort of,
Ah, okay. I didn't recognize what it was at first.
Around my shine, to make sure that's just mine. And I bumped into that. I thought, fantastic. Certain things happen for a reason. We're having it called. Although, mind you, I'm a massive sort of Berlin fan. Sorry, Munich, but I absolutely adore Berlin for, again, its social sort of openness and culture, and that everything goes. So, what I really want to sort of touch on before we close this episode is, what you do. Because of what I do currently, and for the last sort of year and a bit, working with alternative sort of finance providers, and then speaking a lot about open banking, fintech, insurtech sometimes. User experience specialists are viewed as the kind of people who we need moving forward. Why? Because they shape products according to the preferences of the people. They are able to sort of combine data with, again, human and what really I find fascinating, being a person born in the 80s, is that they tend to be much younger, and they tend to already have the charisma and and the confidence that we know what we're talking about. From what you do, and we previously have spoken about agile sort of working methodologies.
Sure.
It's an open question. You can answer it as you wish. What do you think is actually a learning that we can get from agile working? What's the use? What's the
Oh,
value, or
agile.
even the user experience, or anything you want to sort of speak
Sure.
about?
I guess I'll try to relate it just to the being on the spectrum. I think where being on the spectrum has certainly been an advantage is, as far as it's been explained to me, there is a tendency towards seeking out patterns and things, and really getting down into puzzles. The way I'll just sort of go into these rabbit holes. The other day, several weeks ago, I found myself. I have no idea how I got on this topic, but I was just researching something about prime numbers and number theory. I have no idea how I got on this topic, but I found it fascinating. Now, I've always been one foot in the sort of the left brain and right brain world. When I was in high school, my senior year, I took advanced placement art, advanced placement physics, and I've always sort of liked those two. I've always liked having the analytical and the creative kind of coming together, and I think that was what drew me to user experience design, because there is this analytical component. There's sort of a great equalizer with data that says, when you deal in graphic design, which I've done some graphic design before, you're dealing in pure abstraction and subjective opinion. When it comes to UX design, by and large, you form a hypothesis, and the correct design is the design that works. It's the design that you can verify with data. So I like that. There's also the analysis of data, coming up with hypotheses, finding trends in behavior, and that sort of pattern recognition, or coming up with iterating upon ideas. That seems to suit me pretty well. And so, regarding my diagnosis, or my being on the spectrum helping my career at all, I could say for certain, I think that plays a role. I think that definitely is a positive contributing factor to any success I've seen in my job. I think that there definitely helps. When it comes to agile, I think I was hearing about what you were saying before about having this sort of the safe and welcoming open space. This is a really big issue, creating this emotionally safe space. And I think what I would say to companies is start with the low hanging fruit. I don't necessarily need my employer, and this is me personally, I don't need them to make me feel emotionally safe. I think that's a personal responsibility of mine. I understand that's important. But before we get there, before we start worrying about the emotional aspect of it, I feel like many companies, and especially many DEI practitioners, need to start doing the boring stuff really well. They need to start doing the stuff that you can't you can't make an inspiring LinkedIn post about. You need to start doing the really, really mundane stuff that doesn't inspire anybody, but actually helps people who are in an organization who are on the spectrum. Those practical things, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to speak too critically, but you will see very often, for example, on LinkedIn, where you see a lot of DEI, you will see people posting constantly about this event they're going to, this conference they went to, and how eye-opening it was and how wonderful it was. Then try reaching out to those people. I mean, if you post about a new initiative at a company or a group, and there's an initiative to help neurodivergent people, I shouldn't have to become a part-time detective just to figure out how the hell to get involved with that issue. There's a practical component. So I'm really glad that you have taken part in this organization, in this event, and it's been inspiring and fulfilling for you. But now we need the practical part, where the people who actually you're supposed to be helping, you're claiming to help, can get involved somehow. And I think there's an equivalent at organizations, or my company that I'm at. There's a lot of things that they could do that are boring and mundane that would help a lot. And I think agile communication is certainly one of them. Every single company that I know of that is even remotely touching digital is talking about agile communication or agile ways of working, because it's kind of the new sexy cool thing. As far as I'm aware, the agile method of working came largely out of the startup methodology. I mean, there's more of a history to it than that, but the thing that really popularized it in recent times has been sort of the startup world. I don't think it's a mistake that many of these companies that make agile software come out of Silicon Valley, and many of these companies are staffed with people who are on the spectrum. I don't think it's an accident. I think the reason I would emphasize a company or any organization focusing on these practical advantages first and accommodating, including neurodivergent people into their workflows using agile practices, best practices, is because what will help a neurodivergent person, by and large, will help the entire organization be more efficient. And the reason I think that this is the case is because neurodivergent people struggle with executive functioning, sort of the planning that goes on between two people, prioritizing certain tasks and scheduling things. That conversation that would go on between two separate people, that's kind of the conversation that I need to have with myself. And in this way, I think neurodivergent people, autistic people, almost serve as filters for modes of communication that are ineffective. In other words, if a neurodivergent person cannot be successful with a particular way of structuring a project, for example, endless amounts of meetings, endless amounts of email chains, spreading things out across multiple channels, that neurodivergent person is going to flounder. Now, while neurotypical people can manage that, they can do it, they're not going to be as efficient. And the reason I would say is if you focus on these practical aspects first, what will end up happening, in my honest opinion, is first of all, you'll have a workplace where autistic people are able to participate and really really perform very well. But what will also happen is you will start to see neurotypical people leaning into things like asynchronous communication, leaning into fewer meetings, which leads to emptier calendars, using concepts like a single source of truth, where everything is written in a single place and not scattered across countless email chains or PDFs and comment threads and all these different things. If you can successfully do that, rather than autistic people becoming this exception that people need to carve out, this extra thing that they need to accommodate, if you build your company around accommodating these people, and then everybody else also benefits, then these neurodivergent people, rather than being this extra burden that people around them always need to be mindful of, they become this engine of positive change that benefits everybody. I don't want to lead with being neurodivergent. I don't want necessarily to be my identity. I want to be known for excelling at my job and for doing a good job. I think many people are like me. I don't necessarily want that to be how I'm recognized. I don't want it to be what I'm applauded for. I want to do good work. And I would much rather be a person in an organization that is seen as, ever since this person got here, we had to change the way we communicated. And ever since then, everything has gotten so much better. I'm glad this person is here, rather than being this extra thing that I like working this way, but to be a good person, I always need to make this extra effort. And no one wants to feel like a burden, I don't think. And I don't want to feel like a burden on any organization. So instead, I would say there's a lot of practical things that many companies, many organizations can do to improve the flow of communication using agile methodologies. Like I said, asynchronous communication, writing first, reducing the number of meetings, reducing the number of participation in meetings, having clear set agendas, writing sum-ups, writing a summary. All of these things make work possible for neurodivergent people, but all of these practices are wonderful best practices for an entire company. So anybody who does that is going to see their productivity across the board skyrocket. So I would say, yes, emotional support is wonderful, but if what you really need is some motivation as an organization to implement these changes, I truly believe that any organization that commits to this course of action towards changing their workflows to include more neurodivergent people will not just see those people flourish, but will see a positive impact on their bottom line. So it's actually in the company's best interest, organization's best interest, to make these changes for themselves, not just for their neurodivergent employees.
100%. And you know what? Let's not sort of mistake one for another. When we speak about the belonging, the sense of belonging, or indeed the psychological safety, is the what. The how you achieve that is exactly what you very beautifully articulated. The how, the method, is the foundations, the principles on which you will get people to feel that. I cannot get to feel things if you haven't given me, the basis, the practical sort of help, the support in order to get, me feeling this way. I mean, the heart is not really, silly. It's not daft. The heart feeds very much, from the brain, and the brain connects with the practicalities. I mean, for me to feel engaged and for me to feel like I belong and I've been acknowledged, not celebrated, not put up podium, and I get you 100%. It's not about like, look at them, they brought, a new day in the organization, but it's all about how can I deliver the best I can? How can I sort of fulfill my true potential? And my true potential is not being a pen pusher. It's not about counting down the days until I get my salary, or, black my way into getting through. It's about knowing that if I want to sort of study the prime number sort of theory, and we do see the pattern, I'll go and sort of, speak about it and find ways. Or if I do see an outlier, or, another pattern, then have somebody to sort of echo it back to, and hopefully at some point that might become reality, because I guess agility of working, or indeed the digital transformation, or of course how we always like to get anxious and fearful about AI and what's going to happen, future of work. Well, if you don't want to live in fear, then do something about it. Empower the people with these practical steps, with the yes, we need less meetings. We need actually less time and duration in this meeting, so long as we go into the meeting prepared. If
Yeah.
you already have an agenda, not just an agenda, but people having work for them.
I just want to point out that I wasn't necessarily trying to, I hope no one thinks that I was criticizing the idea that some people might need to feel a certain way or feel feel a sense of belonging at work. It's not that. It's simply that my experience has been, it seems like a lot of organizations, they want to make a change and they don't really know where to begin. And I would say to these organizations, start with the boring stuff. That's plenty to start. It's a great start. Start with the boring stuff. Start with the stuff that you can't make inspiring posts about on LinkedIn. It's not that these things don't matter. It's not that you shouldn't want to work a job or have an impact where you can post inspiring things. If your organization is overwhelmed and doesn't really know where to begin, the boring, low-hanging fruit really is a lot. That would really move the needle for a lot of people. And after that, I think those other things you can sort of get to. It's a great place to start. If you're feeling overwhelmed, start. So it's just a message. Please start with the boring stuff. Start with the stuff that seems mundane and very, like I said, not inspiring. I assure you that on its own can make a huge impact. And if you need, like, again, it's just, I really do. I would like to just emphasize that this really is in the self-interest, so to speak, of the organizations themselves. You will see your productivity go up. You will see people getting things done more quickly. Again, because the conversations between team members, the increased efficiency between anything that helps me communicate with myself, anything that helps me organize myself, generally speaking, also helps two different people on a small team organize themselves or prioritize tasks. And so that's what I mean. But I find that this agile way of working, when it suits an autistic person, I believe that autistic person can serve almost as a filter for those inefficient modes of working. If it works for them, it will also improve the methods of working with these other team members as well. And so it's just, so many organizations want to start, but just start with the boring stuff. You don't need to do anything more than that to start.
Yeah, and you know what? That's inspiring enough. What you said earlier about this inspiring post on LinkedIn, personally, probably because of my neurodivergent, I find them yet another sort of selfie, like you put on Instagram. I don't find them inspiring, because it's the lack of depth, it's the lack of, and so what? What? If I don't see the so what, how can I be involved? How does it affect me? Is that something that you do individually to celebrate yourself, another 2, 18, or if I do one day apply and walk in, for the interview, or indeed, get accepted and start working, will I be seeing it from day one? Or do I have to kind of continue digging? I feel I find this too.
Be like an investigator. Yeah, I have to really, how do I get access to these benefits? I would just say, if you want a basic metric for how well your autistic employees are doing, send out an open-ended survey once per quarter and say, how many of you feel that you have everything you need? And just treat it like do you get a passing grade or a failing grade? I mean, at least in the US, a passing grade is 65% or above. And if you send out a survey to your neurodivergent employees, anonymous, and you get back a response 65% or less, say, I don't have what I need, then you don't get to make any inspiring posts to LinkedIn for that quarter. Because if you get a failing grade on a test, you don't take that failing grade home and hang it on the refrigerator. So just focus on the practical stuff first. Ask them, what do they need? I mean, it's really a good place to start. Do you have everything you need? And what can we do to change it? Yeah, it's just a lot of things like that have it's been interesting. It's been an interesting experience. the way certain things get structured within organizations, and
Mm.
there's certain basic things that could change that would move the needle quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. And this is what we all need to acknowledge. This is what we all need to sort of start facing up to. And again, it's a catch-22, because when you speak about the surveys sent to the neurodivergent people, if you don't engage with them, and I mark what you said about the asynchronous sort of collaboration in my paper, most recently for the Institute of Actuaries, I was speaking about that and about, the practicalities in the way that we work together with each other. But of course, the other thing that's important is called co-production. If you want something that's going to speak towards the neurodivergent people, you have to engage them to co-produce it. You cannot have an external or a DNI specialist to do it for them. Engage them, ask them. Does it help them? If it doesn't help them or if it doesn't support them, then it's not for them. And this engagement is going to make them also disclose. This engagement is going to make them say, oh, I believe I've got ADHD. In the UK, we're making, I suppose, good progress into accepting self-diagnosis. You don't have to spend thousands and thousands of pounds, or indeed wait for years until you're offered in the public sort of sector a diagnosis sort of appointment. If your symptoms, and I hear you earlier when you're speaking about, the symptoms, you don't have the solutions, you don't have the whole sort of range. You cannot tell how the others are going to behave, but you do acknowledge your own symptoms. Those symptoms sort of take you in one direction. As a non-specialist, you're okay. Basically, speak about this potentiality. The question is, how can we support you? I mean, look, if I can sort of pick a sentence, I would definitely sort of pick the one, please start with the boring stuff. I loved it. It's just
Start with the unsexy stuff that you can't post about on LinkedIn. That's plenty, more than enough.
Let's keep boring, a reforming sort of new value. I love it. I love it. Look, thank you so much for your time. Thank you
My
also
pleasure.
more for your honesty.